All right. Hey there, and welcome to this episode where I'm going to talk about when prayer becomes compulsive, or really any particular behavior that's related to your faith becomes compulsive. And so, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Matt Cotty. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and the founder of Restored Minds. And before we dive into the show, if you could help us out by liking, subscribing, and leaving a review on iTunes or Spotify, I'd really appreciate it as it helps the show. And if you're looking for help and guidance when it comes to your recovery from OCD and anxiety, please head over to restoredminds.com, or I have some links down in the notes to get you started. Be happy to support you on that. So, with that said, when we talk about prayer and compulsion, and this is in our series on scrupulosity. So also, if you haven't seen or gone through the first several parts of the series, it'll provide a lot of context for this episode. So please do so. But one of the things that happens is that prayer with OCD and anxiety becomes compulsive. And what that means is that a person starts using prayer or Bible reading or confession, going to church as a means to alleviate their fear temporarily. And then what happens is because it alleviates it temporarily, the fear grows, and then the person has to do more compulsions, and this loop begins to spin. And so, and this could be having to pray, like perfectly correct, right? No mistakes, read the Bible perfectly, or it could just be like, constantly praying in your head throughout the day against your fear. Um, and eventually this just can grow with time. And so what to do about that, or what can we do about that? And so this is something that I wrestled with, personally. And so I'll kind of explain my perspective on it. And again, you're welcome to disagree as always. But this was how I really broke out of this. So I had a fear that I was gonna get, or that what if I got possessed, right? And that was a fear that I wrestled with for a good amount of time, and it got very intense, and I was always convinced it was going to happen, at night, right? So every time I was about to go to bed, I'd be worried about, like, when it started getting dark, like I'm like, okay, bedtime's coming, and then I'd get really anxious as I would like lay down and start to go to sleep, and then I would wake up a lot through the night, and have all these dreams, and and then when I'd wake up in the morning and I'd have to like check, and then I'd be praying throughout the day, because no matter how many times that I woke up safely, I'd ultimately be praying again the next day that wouldn't happen again. And I was convinced that, like, the only way that it wasn't happening was because I was doing all these prayers. And when we're, you know, really it comes back down to what you believe about God, right? So obviously, even if you're watching or listening to this episode, there's going to be an assumption here that, especially if this is for you, that you have some faith in some type of God, whatever you whatever you believe that to be for yourself. Because obviously, like, I can't define God in this episode, but the idea that you pray to that God. And because if prayer is becoming compulsive like that, and then the assumption is like you're praying to God. So those may be radical assumptions, but that's what we're kind of operating on here. So when you're praying, and you're afraid, you're praying to God to often alleviate something um, in your environment that you believe is the cause of that fear, or you believe God Himself is the cause of that fear. So you are trying to control God through prayer, right? You're trying to, ultimately alter God. And I always, so a lot of times, so I'd be sitting there praying and praying and praying. Um, don't want to get possessed, don't want to get possessed. And one night I had this moment where I was just done. I was just done. I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not living like this anymore. And I kind of just, I really moved into a state of surrender on this particular fear. And I said, If I go to bed tonight and I get possessed, then so be it. You know? Like really. Like God, if that's what's gonna happen, then that's what's gonna happen. Like I'm not living in fear of this anymore. And this is one element or one way to potentially, again, transcend fear is through the complete surrender, right, to it. It's not maybe it's not the only way. I don't want to ever get as blunt to say that, but the surrender. And then what happened was is I went to bed, woke up, wasn't possessed, and I have never worried about that again. Like it just is like it's a non-issue to me because what I realized is and what I've come to realize. So I went on a period where I was all like, upset at God, right? Thinking that, how could you let me like stay in this loop of praying? And I got like, I got upset towards God. But what I've come to realize since is that was the first time that I was displaying faith. Everything else was me operating out of fear and attempting to control God to alleviate my faith or my fear. I'm sorry. And what faith is truly surrendering and saying, you know what? Like, I don't want that to happen, but I'm gonna trust that like I can't make God do anything. I cannot make God I cannot make God make me certain. Like I actually am here to rely on and to depend on God. And what that means is like from a faith perspective is means that sometimes like I'm not going to know the how and I can't ultimately control God like that as much as I might want to from time to time. And so the surrendering and the releasing of it just completely broke me out of that particular wheel that I was in. And I kept coming back to this idea of like, God doesn't give us a spirit of fear. In the book of, I believe it's First Peter. And when I realized that when I'm operating from fear, it's an indication that I'm in a state of distrust. I'm in a state of distrust. And when I'm trying to pray to control something in my environment that I think is going to then alleviate that distrust, it's still me trusting myself that I know best. And I want God to quote unquote do what I want him to do so that alleviates or because I know best ultimately. And what a state of surrender is, and it's not that you don't like submit your preferences, requests, all of that, or even state your desires. There's nothing, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I do that as well. But ultimately, I came to the realization that there was what prayer really was about for me and what it is about for me now is about getting into the internal state of trust. And sometimes that means affirming certain things about God. Sometimes it means, again, reading certain passages. But what a lot of times it means is relinquishing my fear, right? And saying like, hey, I don't know best. I don't know best. And also displaying like trust in God beyond myself and not thinking that I know what needs to happen to make this go away or to alleviate this. Because as long as I'm stuck in imposing my will, that was when it became really compulsive, is because the only and again, I could hide behind all these things. I mean, oh, Matt, I'm praying so much. I have so much faith. I have so much trust. It's like if you're praying all the time about the same thing, that's like the opposite of faith. Do you really think God needs to have you say the prayer 170 times? Do you really believe that? Or is it like, and you can't hide behind, you have to get really honest with yourself about why are you doing what you're doing. And ultimately, when it's because I want to alleviate my fear, a lot of times that has to do with your perspective on something. And a lot of times, often it's about shifting your perspective altogether, as opposed to trying to make God or manipulate God through prayer. And I feel like when prayer becomes compulsive, that's usually what's happening is there's a manipulation as I feel afraid, I feel this, and I need God to change this, so I feel better. And what prayer is really about is about getting yourself, for me anyway, is about getting yourself to that inner state of knowing, of trusting, of what you might call a high vibrational state without things in your environment appearing different. That's it's getting yourself into a state of trust without the external evidence. And that's more, and again, not through the repetitive confessing or any of that, right? Not through the reassurance, not through any of, so it's again, it's confronting the fear, looking at the underlying beliefs that are perpetuating that fear, and letting go of a lot of that stuff, realizing the state that you're operating from, and then shifting into higher truths, shifting into different beliefs. Again, confronting these emotions that are driving a lot of your behaviors until you've released them. And that actually allows you to shift into perspectives where then you see things totally differently. And sometimes you can go through that path. Sometimes it's just about surrendering the entire fear altogether and saying, look, like I've prayed about this, like I just surrender this, and for me, that was that particular process. And so when prayer becomes compulsive, it's really about understanding what energy or any behavior, right? Interchange prayer with any behavior that's related to religious compulsions. It's about really being honest with yourself of like, why am I doing what I'm doing? And not just assuming it's because you're, oh, I have so much faith, or, in hiding in, dare I say, like the religious hierarchy of like, oh, I'm so religious because I do all these behaviors, but really getting clear on why you do what you do. Because if you really think about if you lived from a place of trust with God, like what that would actually look like, like you wouldn't pray from this state of panic and fear and all. Like living from a state of trust is like a very high state internally. And a lot of times, if we're living in a state of perpetual fear, it's oftentimes because we're believing things that are very incorrect. That was my perspective and my experience. And so when prayer became compulsive for me, what happened is I had to first acknowledge like that's what actually was happening. This had nothing to do with my faith. In fact, me praying all the time was a demonstration of me not having faith. As paradoxical as that sounds, that's just the truth because of the energy state of where I was in, right? It was very compulsive, very scrupulous. And we're not just going to assume that because I was praying that was a good thing, right? It was a demonstration of my lack of faith, if anything. And when I really surrendered, that was actually, ironically, one of the biggest steps of faith that I ever took, and almost instantaneously broke me out of that fear. So it's not that you should never pray again. You have to get clear on why you're praying, how you're praying, what your intention behind praying really is, and really understand what it means to live by faith is not just to compulsively pray to try to make yourself feel better all the time. It's a lot of times about shifting your entire beliefs, letting go of emotions, like doing a lot of inner work to get yourself to the state where you actually live from a place of trust. And that's how I tend to perceive prayer more these days. And I really find a lot of value in that work because it's very much you're working with God and not treating God like a vending machine where you just say, okay, A7, I want this, and then getting upset when that doesn't happen. And it's very emotionally driven, right? And this is really taking, in my opinion, a much more mature perspective and saying, okay, look, like I'm not just going to assume what I'm doing is the best thing, and really look at it from a higher perspective and begin to, especially if you're doing things that no one else does. When you're doing all these prayer rituals that no one else has to do, only you have to do them, it's a good indication that you're doing prayer in a compulsive way, and you need to get honest why you're doing what you're doing, and what that really is communicating about your true beliefs. And so just want to share some perspectives on that. Again, I hope it was helpful. And I just want to kind of talk about my own experience with that and my own, perspective shift on that. So anyways, like I said, if you're looking for help, and if you struggle with scrupulosity, things like that, yeah, please head over to Restored Minds. We have some great resources for you. We, have our 12-week program as well as our book and other things. So some great places to get started. The link's down in the notes. And with that, I wish you a great week, great day, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Hey there. So if you enjoyed that video, we've linked up a few more videos that we think you'd find helpful as well. And if you have found this helpful, we'd really appreciate your support by liking and subscribing. And if you're looking for help and guidance, please check out restoredminds.com as we have several options for you to get started. See you guys soon.